For decades, Americans were told that China is communist. But if that's true, why are Chinese companies competing globally, billionaires being created, factories battling for profit, and private firms like BYD, DJI, and ByteDance dominating entire industries? Why does a communist country have more billionaires than almost anywhere else on Earth? Why do factory workers in Shenzhen clock 12-hour shifts under a system that looks less like Marx and more like the most aggressive version of capitalism you've ever seen? Uncomfortable truth nobody wants to say out loud. China isn't communist. It hasn't been communist in any real economic sense for over 40 years. What China actually runs is a hybrid system economists call state capitalism, a system where the government keeps political control but unleashes brutal, unregulated market competition underneath it. Imagine capitalism with no minimum wage protections that actually get enforced, no real labor unions, no independent courts to sue your employer, and a government that can shut down your competitor overnight if it threatens the wrong person. That's not communism. That's capitalism with the safety rails removed. Let's go back to where this actually started, because most documentaries skip this part. In 1978, after Mao Zedong's death, a leader named Deng Xiaoping took power and said something that should have broken the internet if the internet existed back then. It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. Translation? Ideology doesn't matter. Profit does. That single sentence quietly ended communism in China and replaced it with something far more ruthless. A system where the Communist Party keeps the name, keeps the flag, keeps the propaganda, but runs the economy like a hedge fund. From that moment, China built what insiders call the Iron Rice Bowl collapse. The guaranteed lifetime jobs, free healthcare, and worker protections that actual communism promised were dismantled piece by piece. Millions of state workers were laid off in the 1990s in what's now called jiagang, a word that literally means stepping down from your post. No severance safety net like the West has, no real unemployment insurance. Just, you're on your own now, go compete, and compete they did. Fast forward to today, and China has produced more self-made billionaires than the United States in several recent years. Companies like BYD didn't rise because the government handed out equal opportunity. They rose because millions of smaller competitors were crushed, bought out, or bankrupted in one of the most violent business environments on the planet. Chinese tech founders talk about something called involution, a term that's exploded in Chinese business culture, describing an economy so hyper-competitive that companies undercut each other into exhaustion, workers burn out chasing promotions that barely exist, and everyone runs faster just to stay in the same place. That's not a communist safety net. That's capitalism on steroids, with zero mercy for whoever falls behind. Now here's where it gets darker, and this is the part most videos won't tell you. Inside Chinese tech companies, there's a work culture openly called 996, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. It became so normalized that tech CEOs publicly defended it as a blessing. Meanwhile, workers who complained were quietly blacklisted from the industry. This is happening inside companies competing globally against Apple, Tesla, and Samsung. Companies operating in a country that still calls itself communist on paper, while running labor practices that would trigger federal lawsuits in the United States. So who actually benefits from keeping the communist label alive? That's the real twist. The Communist Party doesn't maintain the name because it believes in shared ownership of the means of production. It maintains the name because it protects political control. As long as the party controls the courts, the military, the media, and who gets to keep their business license, it can allow brutal market capitalism underneath while calling it socialism with Chinese characteristics. That phrase alone should tell you everything. It's not an economic description, it's a branding exercise. It lets the government take credit for capitalist growth while keeping the authority of a one-party state that never has to face an actual election. And this is where American perception gets it completely backwards. We were taught to see China as the ideological opposite of American capitalism. But what's actually happening is almost the mirror image of American concerns about corporate power, except with the government itself acting as the biggest corporation of all. State-owned banks decide who gets funded. Local governments compete against each other for factory investment, like rival startups. Provinces are ranked and promoted based on GDP growth, the same way a company promotes a top-performing sales region. Officials who deliver economic growth get promoted up the political ladder. Officials whose regions underperform get sidelined. It's a performance-based hierarchy, just wearing a red flag instead of a corporate logo. Now let's talk about the human cost, because numbers on a whiteboard don't capture what this actually looks like on the ground. Migrant workers, over 200 million of them, leave rural villages every year to work in coastal factory cities, often living in dormitories owned by their employer, separated from their kids for months or years at a time, tied to a residency system called hukou that restricts their access to healthcare and education outside their home region. That's not a side effect of communism. That's a labor mobility system that makes it easier for companies to extract cheap labor while limiting workers' ability to demand better conditions. If you're watching this in the US and thinking that sounds uncomfortably close to certain labor debates happening back home, you're not wrong, and that's exactly why this story matters to you. Here's the part that should really make you pause. American companies didn't get tricked into working with China. They got exactly what they wanted: lower labor costs, weaker regulations, less accountability. For 30 years, U.S. corporations quietly benefited from a system they publicly criticized as authoritarian, because that same authoritarian control kept wages low and unions absent. The communist label was never really the problem for global capital. It was the selling point: a government stable enough to guarantee order, but ruthless enough to guarantee profit. That's the real story nobody puts in the headline. So what does this mean going forward? China is now trying to walk a line that might be impossible to hold. It wants the innovation and wealth creation of unrestrained capitalism, the next BYD, the next DJI, the next global tech giant, while also keeping total political control that real capitalism, historically, tends to erode over time. Wealthy entrepreneurs start wanting political influence. Educated urban populations start wanting more freedom. And the government has already shown it will crack down hard when that line gets close. Just look at how quickly some of China's biggest tech billionaires disappeared from public view or had their companies restructured overnight when they got too big, too outspoken, or too independent. So here's the real question this video leaves you with. Is China communist because it says so? Or is communism just the flag flying over one of the most aggressive capitalist economies on Earth? I want you to answer that in the comments. And